Good Thursday, everyone. Welcome into today's daily Bible reading for June the 23rd. Today we are reading in Daniel chapter 3 and 1 Corinthians chapter 2. Daniel chapter 3 and 1 Corinthians chapter 2. Let's get the text up on the screen from Daniel 3 and let's get to reading. We continue on reading of Daniel's time within the nation of Babylon, within the city of Babylon. Remember, he and many other Jews were deported from Jerusalem and taken to Babylon. And there are four that are highlighted for us. There's Daniel, there is Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Those are all of their Hebrew names. These are young men who were judged to be of high quality, and they were given a great education in Babylonian culture, and the effort was to assimilate them into being Babylonians so that they could serve the king. Well, they continue to trust in God. They put their full confidence in him and knew that even if they were asked to do things that they did not want to do, that they would stick to their guns, they would stick to their convictions, and the Lord would deliver them in those ways. And he certainly has done so far throughout this particular writing. And now we're going to see that again. We're going to see an opportunity where the three friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, who are known by their Babylonian names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they're going to be put to the test. Now it's time for them to stick to their convictions and to put their trust in God, even in the face of great punishments, being a very severe and very painful death by fire. So let's notice this text here. Daniel chapter 3. In verse number 1, King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to assemble the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces to attend the dedication of the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces assembled for the dedication of the statue the king had set up. And then they stood before the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. A herald loudly proclaimed, "People of every nation and language, you are commanded, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum, and every kind of music, you are to fall face down and worship the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. But whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire." Therefore, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and every kind of music, people of every nation and language fell down and worshiped the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Some Chaldeans took this occasion to come forward and maliciously accuse the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. You as king have issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum, and every kind of music must fall down and worship the gold statue. Whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. And there are some Jews you have appointed to manage the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men have ignored you, the king. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up." Then in a furious rage, Nebuchadnezzar gave orders to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Shadrach asked them, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is it true that you don't serve my gods or worship the gold statue I've set up? Now, if you're ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum, and every kind of music, fall down and worship the statue I made. But if you don't worship it, you will immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God who can rescue you from my power?" So, verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king Nebuchadnezzar, "We don't need to give you an answer to this question. If the God we serve exists, then he can rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he can rescue us from the power of you, the king. But even if he does not rescue us, we want you as king to know that we will not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with rage, and the expression on his face changed toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and he gave orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than was customary, and commanded some of the best soldiers of his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to throw them into the furnace, or to the furnace of blazing fire. So these men, in their trousers, robes, head coverings, and other clothes, were tied and thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. And since the king's command was so urgent, and the furnace extremely hot, the raging flames killed those men who carried Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego up. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the furnace of blazing fire. Then King Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in alarm, and he said to his advisors, "Oh, didn't we throw 3 men bound into the fire?" "Well, yes, of course, your majesty," they replied to the king. He exclaimed, "Look, I see 4 men not tied, walking around in the fire unharmed. And the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the door of the furnace of blazing fire, and called, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you servants of the Most High God, come out." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. And when the satraps, prefects, governors, and kings' advisors gathered around, they saw that the fire had no effect on the bodies of these men. Not a hair of their heads was singed, their robes were unaffected, and there was no smell of fire on them. Nebuchadnezzar replied, "Praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. His angel, he sent his angel, referring to God. God sent his angel and rescued his servants who trusted in him. They violated the king's command and risked their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I issue a decree that anyone of any people, nation, or language who says anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego will be torn limb from limb, and his house made a garbage dump, for there is no other God who is able to deliver like this." Then the king rewarded Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Daniel chapter 3. This, of course, if you've grown up in a church setting, if you remember going to Bible class as a younger person, then you probably remember this being one of the favorite stories that we would teach young people in those classes. And I want to focus in on the statement that is made by these 3 individuals here in verse 17. Verse 17, also verse 18. "If the God we serve exists, then he can rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he can rescue us from the power of the king." Notice the language there. He can do this. Not that he will, but he can. They had full confidence in God's ability to deliver them in this moment. But even if he does not rescue us, and that right there is an acknowledgement of God's sovereignty, that he has the right to make a decision right now. And he can save us if he wants to, but he doesn't have to. So even if he does not rescue us, it's not a matter of his inability to do so, but it's a matter of his willingness to do so. Does he see this being a time whenever it's good for him to intervene? If so, great. He can. We have full confidence in this. But even if he does not, we want you to know that we still don't care about you and your gods and the gods that you worship. We don't care. That our respect, our reverence is not dependent on whether or not we will be rescued. It remains the same. We know who our God is, and we will worship him faithfully, regardless of what he chooses to do in this moment. Just a tremendous example of faith these 3 men show. Don't quite know exactly how old they are at this moment, maybe still in their younger years of life. But regardless, whether they're young or they were old, their faith is tremendous. Their example is outstanding. And may we, May we grow and mature to have this type of faith as well, that regardless of what God will or will not do, we still trust in him, and we will put our full confidence in him, and he alone will have our reverence and our devotion. Daniel chapter 3. All right, hopping on over to 1 Corinthians chapter 2. 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse number 1, where the Apostle Paul has started this letter. Again, not the first letter, it seems, that he has written to the Corinthians. This seems to be the second one, even though we refer to as 1 Corinthians because it's the one that we have. But we have this letter. The focus is on division within the church. The focus is on arrogance and boasting within the church. And Paul's very first thing he says in chapter 1 is, hey, put your confidence in God. Boast in him. If you're going to boast in him. Don't boast in people. Don't boast in self. Boast in God alone. Let's read together here in 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse number 1. When I came to you, this is Paul speaking, when I, Paul, came to you, brothers and sisters, announcing the mystery of God to you, I did not come with brilliance of speech or wisdom. I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. I came to you in weakness, in fear, and in much trembling. My speech and my preaching were not with persuasive words of wisdom, but with a demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith might be based on human wisdom. So that your faith might not be based on human wisdom, but on God's power. We do, however, speak a wisdom among the mature, but not a wisdom of this age or of the rulers of this age who are coming to nothing. On the contrary, we speak God's hidden wisdom in a mystery, a wisdom God predestined before the ages for our glory. None of the rulers of this age knew this wisdom, because if they had known it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. But as it is written, what no eye has seen, no ear has heard, and no human heart has conceived, God has prepared these things for those who love him. Now, God has revealed these things to us by the Spirit, since the Spirit teaches everything, even the depths of God. For who knows a person's thoughts except his spirit within him? And in the same way, no one knows the thoughts of God except the Spirit of God. Now we have not received the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who comes from God, so that we may understand what has been freely given to us by God. We also speak these things not in words taught by human wisdom, but in those taught by the Spirit, explaining spiritual things to spiritual people. But the person without the Spirit does not receive what comes from God's Spirit, because it is foolishness to him. He is not able to understand it, since it is evaluated spiritually. The spiritual person, however, can evaluate everything, yet he himself cannot be evaluated by anyone. For who has known the Lord's mind that we may instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ. 1 Corinthians chapter 2. Thinking about this text here, this particular section here, verses 10 through the end of the chapter, who knows the person's thoughts except the Spirit within him? In the same way, no one knows the thoughts of God except the Spirit of God. Now we have not received the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who comes from God, so we may understand what has been freely given to us by God. If we are going to know the mind of God, a mind that is incomprehensible to us, because the mind of God is infinite, but our mind is very, very finite or finite. With that being the reality, we would not be able to understand anything unless it was God who has given it to us. And what is the means by which God has given us his mind? Through his Spirit. What is the Spirit given us? It is the Word. It is the inspired text that sits before us. And therefore, we should be very appreciative, very, very appreciative that God would allow his mind to be revealed to us by means of the Spirit, by means of the revelatory nature of Scripture, that he has revealed to us again his mind by the Spirit through these inspired men. Therefore, can we be thankful today for that? Can we be thankful that the infinite God would love us so much that he would give us even just the smallest portion of that infinite mind through the Spirit to be delivered to us, so that we can read these words. And by reading these words, by meditating upon these words, by thinking upon these words, by investigating and studying these words, we can come to know God's will for us. How grateful we should be for that. How grateful that God has loved us so much that he has given us what is necessary for us to know him in his will. I think that's important whenever we think about the very probable reality that there is some communication between Paul and these individuals that we don't have. That might cause people to really worry. Well, why don't we have that? Let me say this. If we needed to have it, I believe God would have given it to us. If we needed to have those, if it is impossible for us to understand God without those texts, then God is not fully provided for us. But I believe it is perfectly possible for us to know what God would have us to know by what we have. And I believe that's a part of the inspiration process too. It's part of the providence of God. Inspiration and providence is not just about how the people wrote it, but the fact that they were preserved for us, that God preserved these texts for us, that he worked with the individuals to write these texts down and to preserve these texts for us. Now, all of that is a part of God's inspiration. All of it is a part of his providence. All of it is a sign to us that he wants us to know him and he wants us to know his will. And he's given us the thing necessary for us to do so. Let's be thankful for that. And let's not waste that. Let's spend time reading in God's word together. Let's spend time meditating upon these things. And let's allow what we read and what we meditate upon, what we come to understand, let us allow those things to strengthen our faiths and help us to be people, the type of people that God would have us to be, disciples of his son, those who are even imitating the very character of his son, which again is revealed to us within these texts. Thanks so much for tuning in. Hope you have a great rest of your Thursday. Looking forward to reading with you again tomorrow as we get into Daniel chapter 4 and 1 Corinthians chapter 3. Daniel 4 and 1 Corinthians 3 are on the schedule for tomorrow, Friday, June the 24th. Looking forward to reading that with you then. Take care and God bless.